Hello and welcome to another episode of AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemaller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, we talked with Jay Waldvogel, who's somebody that's been around agricultural co-ops his whole career. And he has some great perspectives that he shares with us on cooperatives, the business model itself, some perspectives on not so good co-ops and perspectives on well-performing co-ops and what that takes. So listen up, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Jay Waldvogel. Jay Waldvogel, welcome to the AgCulture Podcast today. It's so great to have you. We've had a lot of experience over the years, and we met, what was it, in 2005, right? 2006?
Long time, yeah. 5 or 6, yeah.
Almost 20 years ago now. And I always remember the line, you've said it many times, I've been around you long enough to hear it many times. You're known as the guy that knows a little about a lot, but not an expert on anything, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Perfect. That's your title for the day.
Awesome. There's so much wiggle room in that. You can't hold me accountable for anything. It's perfect.
Well, go into that a little bit. There's a lot of things that you can see links in business when you have perspective of a lot of different things in business, right? Rather than just depth. How has that played out in your career?
Yeah, I think I've always found it most interesting to be curious about lots of stuff, right? I tell people, if you look through a process of a career, I haven't managed my career at all. I've just gone from things I found interesting to other things I found interesting, which leads you to this kind of shallow, across a lot of things approach. It's necessarily committing yourself to being an expert in anything. It's neither one is better or worse than the other. But the thing I like about it is the perspective you can get about how you can connect the different dots. If you know enough about the different parts, you can see how they might fit together differently, fit together better. And that's what I find most interesting. That's what I find most stimulating, is to find those new ways to connect things, as opposed to grind deeper and deeper into that one thing you're an expert about.
And I think you are probably an expert in the field of business model of co-ops. It's something that you've been involved with pretty much your whole career in agriculture. You just retired from Dairy Farmers of America, and so you got a career change here, but you've been involved in co-ops for, what was it, 30, 40 years over your whole career, right?
Yeah, I would say that I'm a practical expert. I've had experience in co-ops for my entire life. You want a theoretical expert on co-ops, there's some better ones to do it than I am. But I even remember my first experience with co-ops. We were farming. Dad was a dairy farmer in Wisconsin. And I distinctly remember the first introduction of the cooperatives was on that hot summer day when you're out baling hay, and there's a cooperative meeting down the road, and they're having lunch. And Dad throws you in a truck, and he goes, "We're going to get free food." So you run down to the co-op meeting. Well, what a co-op is, why it is, I have no idea. I just know that they give you free food, and Dad was a big fan of free food. So I guess that's my co-op introduction all the way through. To your point, every place I've worked my entire career has been by happenstance, not by choice necessarily, a cooperative.
And you've been in cooperatives not only in the U.S., but all around the globe.
Yeah, so I've had the chance to work and live in the Netherlands for a number of years, where I worked for Dutch Dairy Co-op, a dairy co-op that has since become part of the Friesen Campina Cooperative. And I also spent a number of years living and working in New Zealand, originally for the New Zealand Dairy Board, which while I was there became the Cooperative Fonterra. And along the way, I bounced a few other places, worked with co-ops in Australia, other co-ops in New Zealand. So yeah, I've seen co-ops from lots of different angles and directions. including ones where they speak a strange language.
So the business model of cooperatives, a lot of people today don't quite understand how that got started. They don't know the history behind it. Do you want to explain a little bit on why cooperatives actually started as a business model?
Yeah, maybe I'll take the perspective about what in the case of dairy applies for cooperatives. So why do you see so many dairy farmer cooperatives? There's different reasons for different cooperatives across agriculture and different drivers for why they're formed. Dairy is really at one far extreme in the sense that if you look at the first concern a farmer has, it's how do I market my product?
Mm-hmm.
How do I de-risk the fact that I'm producing a product? And if I'm making a grain crop that I can maybe harvest and store even for a couple of years, that gives me some flex. If I'm producing milk two times a day even, it's a fresh product, it's a perishable product. My biggest concern is, do I have a home for it every day, twice a day, every couple of days it gets picked up? And so cooperative models in the very first instance were a way for farmers to de-risk their business. How can I make an investment in dairy and know that I'm going to be able to have a market for my product? And that's held true in dairy forever. It's still true today, even if you look around for farmers. Whether you're a small farmer or a large farmer, the ability to know you have a secure market is essential for dairy, where it's really interesting for other agricultural products. And I think that's still true today. And if you look at developing markets, even where dairy is still a nascent business, you see the fact that co-ops are on the list because same issue. How do I commit to a business model? How do I commit to business on a livelihood if I don't know if I got a home for my milk all the time? So that initial interest in cooperatives is really about risk management. If you think that a co-op starts in the beginning because the farmers want to have some common way to reduce the risk of marketing their product, I just know it's going to get picked up every day. And again, it's a risk that exists today if you're a farmer. Mm-hmm. If you're selling to an independent or if you're selling to a place where you don't have an ownership stake or a voice in the governance of business. And the second one is really about your ability to ensure a fair price. So once you know you have a home for your milk, how do you ensure you get a fair price? How do you have enough, I won't use market power as a wrong word, but enough position in the market to be able to make sure you get the best possible price for your milk? And doing that together, doing that collectively, doing that cooperatively often gives you that ability. So in the second instance, you're just trying to assure yourself a competitive price. And if you get beyond that, cooperatives offer opportunities to add additional value. Are there things that we can do as a group of farmers that we couldn't do individually? Can I invest in a business line or a processing plant or create a brand or create a new marketplace where I can do that together better with a group of farmers as opposed to on my own? So cooperatives often have that ability to kind of grow from the most basic purpose in the beginning to start to add different levels of value. And even at that end, adding value isn't necessarily always about marketing your product. It can be about how you can collectively reduce your costs by cooperatively buying ingredients or cooperatively buying services. So there's different levels of a co-op, and all of those create different levels of complexity, different levels of challenges, different levels of risk. But at the core, if you look at any cooperative, the ability to make certain that you de-risk that member's ability to produce the milk and give them a fair price, that's the starting point for everything.
You spent quite a few years at different co-ops around the world at kind of pivotal points of their life cycle, different transition points. You look at Friesland Campina, look at the New Zealand Dairy Board, then Fonterra. What were those co-ops going through at the times when you were there during that transition period? Why were they transitioning into maybe a new direction?
So if you walk through that, when I was at Campina, you had not too long before that, you'd had the quota system come in place. And so you had farmers who were now dealing with the reality they only had the minimal ability to grow their production. So if you think about it as a farmer, a dairy farmer, for example, you can make value by increasing volume, becoming more efficient. Mm-hmm. Most farmers do that as a matter of course. It's the history of agriculture as you become bigger in scale and more efficient over time. You can make more money at a better price for your product. And many times that means adding value to it. And if you think about a farmer as a freedom to grow, more often than not, he wants to have capital to put into his own farm. I want to buy more land. I want to buy more cows. I want to make more milk. If you have a farmer who's limited or unable to grow, they're looking for ways to get higher return for what they already have. And so they tend to want to invest in downstream processing. So the time I was arriving, you had the Dutch industry, for example, was very much committed to investing further and further downstream. How do they add more value to their members' milk, knowing that that's the greatest driver of value for their members? Investing in overseas markets, investing in Russia, starting the process in China, going deeper and deeper into the brands. They already had good brands, but getting even stronger in their brand positions. And you can compare and contrast that to Fonterra, which when I arrived was still very much in a heavy growth mode, right? The driver for value creation for farmers, wealth creation for farmers was more volume. Mm-hmm. Their distance from the market, their distance from customers, their need to process the milk meant that most of their secondary processing was still largely commodities. So they weren't adding a lot of value with that product. But boy, if your farmer could grow 10% production every year and become more efficient, incredible value driver. So really different stages of the sector driving very different behavior of the cooperatives. And different stages of all the cooperatives I work for, you'd have different points in place. And the U.S. almost is in a stage of kind of moving through some of that as well. So where does the U.S. market look in the future? From a moment in time 20 years ago where if you were a dairy producer, oftentimes you had options for your milk. You look around and say, well, I was selling milk to that guy, but didn't like his price. I can hop on the next truck coming by. Didn't like to look at the driver, so we changed again. And now that guy ran over my dog, so never going back there again. You had options. Now, if you look at the way the U.S. is set up, with the capacity being fairly limited, the cost of building more capacity being very high, the ability to simply grow milk where you want to, when you want to, has changed. So what does your cooperative have to do for you now versus what maybe it would have been driven by 20 years ago? So yeah, I've seen different parts and phases of it, and some of those are still evolving, certainly in the U.S.
What are some of the instances that you've seen it not work?
Yeah, there's a couple different examples, and we could probably spend the whole day on what does work and what doesn't work. I think what often is the problem with cooperatives is that farmers don't trust themselves enough to control it or allow somebody else to take the control away, and you start to lose sight of what is the core reason you exist. You start to forget that you exist to put wealth for farmers, right? The farmers are the owners, the farmers are the governors, and how do you look at the wealth possibilities for them? And oftentimes the examples will come when you hire managers who look at cooperative models as being very hard. They're very hard, they're very complicated. You're forced to think more deeply about the value proposition. But if I have a listed company, I buy milk and I make a product and I sell it, and I can see my margins really clearly. I can see my free cash flow very clearly. I can see my stock price very clearly based on that performance. And oftentimes the lowest milk price is the best price if you're in dairy. If you're in a cooperative, you need to be thinking through, how do I create more value for the farmer? And sometimes it is just allowing them to grow more milk because the return on their farm is 20%. Why wouldn't you let them get to 20% versus saying, no, I want to get a 5% return by investing in a brand? So it's harder. And sometimes you will find examples of where management has come in and they become enamored of the shiny thing, the easier thing. Let's just do brands. Let's do marketing. Let's do value products because that's what really zings. And oftentimes you forget the core purpose of why you're there. And there's 2 or 3 examples in Australia alone of where dairy cooperatives have gone off on the march of, I want to be more of a corporate. And from a farmer perspective, why would you trade a great cooperative for a very average corporate? Mm. And oftentimes those models have failed. And again, there's lots of examples of that. Other examples that are interesting are cooperatives that in a similar vein want to list or partially list. And the logic is sound because you look at it and you say, well, there's value in my business that's not being recognized because I'm not listed. You get a better return on the stock market with outside people in. But the natural tensions of outside investors wanting the lowest possible milk price and the farmers wanting the highest possible milk price, when you start to create 2 different ownership approaches, it never works. You don't actually create value, you destroy value. You don't create a streamlined approach to the market, you just complicate it. You create a huge layer in between. So I've seen where cooperatives kind of outsmart themselves in the market, outsmart themselves in the value proposition, and lose track of the core reason they exist, which is to put money and wealth in the hands of the owners. And the way to do that sometimes isn't the most sexy, isn't the most fun, and is definitely not the easiest.
You mentioned governance earlier. How does a cooperative function when you have uh, one member that's in governance who might be in that position where, hey, the co-op is more valuable to me as if I can scale my business on my farm, versus
Yep.
the person that's in that same boardroom that's at to the point where I only want to milk X number of cows. I'm not planning on really increasing my milk production, so I need more value creation downstream through brands or other execution in the co-op. How does that work, or doesn't it? Is it d-
Yeah.
is a co-op function better if all the members are kind of on the same value proposition?
So this is the hard part of co-ops, right? The power of co-ops is that having the owners be the governor means you're connected to what's most important. It means you can take generally a longer term approach. The challenge is when those owners, who are all CEOs of their own business, are not fully aligned on the direction. You have to work at it, right? It takes work, it takes communication, it takes engagement that you don't have to do if you just have a listed company and stockholders. You can just say, if you don't like it, go sell me and buy somebody else. The answer in one front is the more homogeneous the cooperative is, generally the easiest it is to manage. If you think about farmers all being the same size, same business model, same approach, same stage of life and evolution of businesses and evolution of plans for the future, it does become easier, right? And I'll overstate it, but an example, you could look at New Zealand 20, 25 years ago, about the time Fonterra was coming around. All their milk was marketed effectively through the New Zealand Dairy Board before they were created, that they had one global marketplace. 97% of the milk was exported. That effectively meant when it came back, the way they did their milk pricing, every farmer got the same milk price. They farmed in the same basic farming systems. Now it's changed a lot since then with more feed additives and more confinement type operations. But in general, back then they farmed the same way. 85% of them used the same genetics. They had study groups to work together to share their ideas. They all had a very common approach, and they were therefore very homogeneous in how they approached the market. In some ways, that's an easy thing to manage. If you compare it to the U.S., for example, use DFA as a cooperative example, the difference between farmers on the extremes is dramatic. You
Mm-hmm.
get farmers milking tens of thousands of cows using confinement systems who buy all their feed. You've got farmers who milk 40 cows who farm all their own land. The large farmer might be in a market that is cheese driven or is export driven milk powder. The small farmer might be in a market where he's having class one fluid utilization. And exactly to your point, if I go to that farmer in the West who's got a relatively low milk price, but can dramatically grow based on his farming model and location, he wants to grow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only going to make more value by making more milk. I can become more efficient. And that's how I add wealth. And I'm not going to get a class one price for my milk in the middle of the desert somewhere out west. It's not going to happen. If you're the farmer who's in the Northeast, to oversimplify it, and the market is heavy in class one, and you know you're never going to grow. Maybe I'm 40 cows, maybe I'm 200 cows. This is the size I'm going to be. I'm not going to get any more value by becoming more efficient. I have to get more for my product. How do I get more? I want you to invest in brands. I want you to invest in products. I want you to invest in innovation that's going to get me a higher price for my product. Now, those are diametrically opposed approaches.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get in the boardroom when you have those two people next to each other? One saying, the greatest value is to get more from my milk. Every dollar you have coming in, invest in brands and innovation and marketing. Nope. Every dollar you bring in, I need a new cheese plant. I need a new powder plant. I need to make more product. Those are obviously not impossible to overcome. There are cooperatives who do it. DFA has done it really well, I think, over the last couple of decades. But it takes a lot of work. And you have to be able to explain to both of those extremes how the decisions you make help them. If I put a cheese plant in and I get more product exported, that's going to help reduce pressure on the supply side in the US. That makes it easier for a farmer in the Northeast to get a better price for his milk. You don't want tanker loads of milk running from west to east. That's going to be negative. If I'm in the business of creating higher value for my products through brands, ultimately that helps everybody. If I make a higher profit on the product, the cooperative is more financially secure. That helps it be able to invest in a new cheese plant, helps it deliver a higher milk price for the farmers out west. But you've got to be able to define that and communicate it, and that's where the hard work comes in. Which is why managers sometimes go, that's really hard, let's just do the cool thing, and then you have the bad stories we talked about earlier. Yeah.
Those don't work out very well.
No.
Give us some perspective on regional versus global co-ops.
The reality of the world today from a dairy perspective is we're a global market, and we've been that way for quite some time. If you look at the base products around the world, skim milk powder, non-fat dry milk powder, it's a commodity that moves around the world just the same as yellow corn or soybeans do. And so to that extent, we are in the U.S. really exposed to global markets. In Europe, they're exposed to global markets. In New Zealand, they're exposed to global markets. In China, you're exposed to global markets. It doesn't mean that you have to be in the position of New Zealand where most of the product is exported. You're still in that market. Even in China, where you import, you're affected by that marketplace. So every co-op these days, every farmer these days is affected by the global market. The question is, does your cooperative need to play in there or just be aware of it and understand how the movements go? So if you think about a cooperative that wants to play globally, there's kind of a progression. Maybe it's a different way to answer the same question. If you think about a regional cooperative in the U.S., you're more likely going to be very domestically focused. You're impacted by global, doesn't matter. The price of milk is impacted by global. But you can have everything you do be very localized. The milk I produce is processed here, is sold here. At some point, as you get bigger, you start to become more engaged in an export market. So you're not just impacted by the market, you participate in it. You're just putting product you already make on a boat and making it go away. Sometimes you're not even concerned about what the customer on the other side wants. You're just getting them to take what you have. I know you'd like some white cheese, but I make yellow cheese, orange cheese. I know you like skim milk powder, but I make non-fat dry milk, so you're going to get it. And then at some point, you become more of a global cooperative where you start to respond to what those customers want. And you not only make it in the U.S., you start to make it overseas. You start to say, well, if I have a technology or a product, can I make this product in a different country and supply those customers? So there's kind of an evolution you get to. And I think when you look at Europe as an example, where there are strong global cooperatives, Arla's and Fries and Campinas as an example. There are others. If you look at New Zealand and Fonterra, those are cooperatives that have been truly global for a long time and have made that leap from just dealing in my own milk to moving it to actually processing in other marketplaces. And that kind of evolution changes your perspective on how you run your business very much. That's a complicated answer to a simple question, but I haven't got a better one. Get your editor out, Paul. Get your editor out. Remove that one.
Scratch. How do you see the cooperative model changing in the future? I know you touched on it a little bit, but what, in your perspective, how does it need to change for the future? I mean, you talked about the global side of things, being aware of that, and are there any other ways that you see it's fundamentally going to change in the future?
It's changing all the time, and it's changing in different parts of the world at different scales and different times. As an example, if you look at the U.S., and we talked about earlier how 20 years ago, most farmers had options where to send their milk to. And so as a consequence, most cooperatives weren't very thick. They didn't have a lot of processing, a lot of brands. A lot of co-ops were just marketing co-ops, collect the milk, become a supply chain operator, and sell it to a private company down the road to actually process it. But over time, you've seen those cooperatives become thicker, invest in their own processing, maybe initially in some more commodity-type products, but increasingly in higher value brands. And it brings you a different math in terms of, as a farmer, how much of my assets are invested on my farm and how much are invested downstream. In the U.S. in the past, you might have had, 97% of your assets on your farm, my land, my cows, my working capital. then maybe only 3% in terms of your cooperative capital was invested there, just enough to keep trucks on the road. Compare and contrast that to Europe and New Zealand, where that percentage was 15, 20%, where those farmers had to invest more for different reasons. In Europe, again, they're trying to create value. They need to be having higher value processing plants and investing in brands and innovation. And that takes capital, that takes money. And the farmers had to invest more to get there. In New Zealand, where they were so far away from their customers, they had to have primary processing. They had to have milk powder plants, had to have cheese plants. And so they became thicker. And I think as you look forward, cooperatives increasingly need to have more capital. Farmers have to put more in, not just in an absolute sense, but even as a percentage of their investments, to secure the market in that first instance, to de-risk the ability to make the milk. In the second instance, to start to ensure they can reach those markets. To have that competitive milk price, you need to be in the market with a product increasingly. So I think what you're seeing is that the cooperative model is evolving in the developed world to where farmers need to think about how they put more capital into the cooperative so it can actually become a thicker cooperative. And where the risk comes a little bit is as farmer groups get bigger and bigger, and you've seen this in New Zealand, you've seen it in the past, in Europe not so much, you're starting to see it here in the US, those farmers can make their own capital choices. As opposed to having a little bit of money invested in my cooperative, maybe I can get enough capital together to do it on my own. So is the cooperative able to add enough value, be relevant enough to its members that they choose to put their capital in the cooperative as opposed to into their own processing plant, for example? And that's starting to become a tension point, I think, more than what it has in the past. And it's becoming less of a be in the cooperative, don't have much capital in, or go invest in your own plant, for example, to, I got to put some money in the cooperative. It's not like it used to be. So the choice becomes less black and white, becomes a little bit more gray. So I think cooperatives are evolving to where they have to have more, and that puts stress on the cooperative itself, especially where you have this real split, this heterogeneity in the members. It's a lot easier to keep them all together when the capital requirements are low. When it becomes higher, it's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. What do you ever see a tipping point, especially in the US, where farm numbers get to be so consolidated that the co-op model just isn't as valuable anymore?
Yes. And this goes back to an earlier conversation about if you're looking forward to a co-op model today, it's a different conversation, I think, than it was 20 or 40 or certainly 100 years ago. I think that as you see in the U.S., it's not simply a matter of consolidation. That again, is it's a feature of agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back 100 years, dairy was really, really consolidated versus what it might have been 200 years before that. So that's not an unfamiliar trend. The interesting thing for me in the U.S. now in particular is that you're getting this kind of survive if you're small, survive if you're big. In the middle, there's a real valley of challenge, right? So if I can milk a couple hundred cows and be under government programs, I'm probably financially okay. Not great, but I'm okay. I've got some risk mitigation for exposure. If I'm really large and efficient, I'm probably okay. What about that middle? And it applies, quite honestly, to dairy plants as well. If I have a small niche dairy plant, I'm probably okay. If I have a huge efficient plant, whether it's milk powder or white milk or cheese, I'm probably okay. If I'm in the middle, there's some level of risk. And so if you think about that middle under threat or disappearing, the large farmers having more opportunity to simply do something on their own, if they choose. I'm not saying it's not always the best choice, but if they choose. Yeah, the idea of having farmers come together for the benefit of all the farmers becomes harder if those farmer groups become more isolated. So I see it as a different environment than what it was in the past and more challenging for co-ops. And again, if part of that is co-ops have to become thicker, have to make some of those investments, how do you then avoid this tipping point of still understanding how that delivers value to members as opposed to, ooh, that's fun and cool, I want to go play in the market, and miss that? So I think it's getting harder for co-ops because of the footprint of the farmers, because of the nature of the business model, and they require work. They require work. You have to put the time in. And if that doesn't happen, we've seen lots of examples where co-ops disappear.
Yep.
Australia is a great example. Australia was dominated by dairy co-ops in the past, and now I'm not sure what's left.
Yeah, you know that story pretty well. The whole Murray Goulburn fiasco. I think that's what it's called.
I think they were the third one in line fiascos, though. They weren't the originators, but yeah, they were
Yeah,
there.
right. You want to explain that a little bit? Because I think that's a fascinating story, and that's really changed the entire industry for what 15 years now in Australia.
Um, I'll use the Bonlac example if I can. It's a slightly different one than Murray Goulburn. Murray Goulburn actually came after, which the stunning thing is that Murray Goulburn didn't learn from Bonlac. So Bonlac would have been, together with Murray Goulburn and Dairy Farmers of Australia at one point, there were three big co-ops in Australia. And Bonlac was the one that was kind of the most diversified. Dairy Farmers of Australia was heavy on brands. So they had drinking milk and yogurts and such. And Murray Goulburn was more the commodity producer back then. They were kind of in the cheese and the dairy powder space. So Bonlac had aspirations of being something bigger and bolder. And they hired, I think, a CEO from Coca-Cola, and they invested heavily in supporting the Olympics that were in Australia around that period of time. Spent a lot of money, spent a lot of capital, made some bets on currency exchange, basically decided they were going to become a corporate entity. So we're going to be cool and sexy and fun, and aren't your farmers happy that you're invested in us? And lost track of how they create value for the farmers. And in the end, took a very good cooperative, made it a very bad corporate run by people who didn't know the right choices to make, disappeared. Murray Goulburn had that example and didn't learn from it. They ended up repeating almost exactly the same things, whereas opposed to sticking to the things that made their farmers money, they started to do the things that they thought was really cool for the business. Hired outside CEOs who didn't understand the complexity of the business model, didn't understand how you look at value all the way through to the farmers, and decided to do things in the marketplace that just didn't make sense. It became a bad corporate instead of a good cooperative. And you have a situation now where you have almost no cooperative milk to speak of, really, in Australia. That's the over exaggeration. But they went from, I think when I arrived in New Zealand, the amount of milk produced in New Zealand and Australia was almost exactly the same, really close to the same. Since that time, New Zealand has, I think, more than doubled, and Australia has halved, which goes back to what's the power of the cooperative to help the farmer.
So I think that's a really interesting perspective of how it's shaped negatively shaped the entire industry, and with Fonterra, what they did in New Zealand, I mean, almost at the same time, like you said, was the exact opposite, and they've really built up a lot of wealth in New Zealand.
Incredible amounts of wealth. Yeah,
Yeah,
farmers have done incredibly well. And I think that it goes a little bit to how you feel about your business, how you feel about investing in your business, how you feel about investing in your farm, investing in your cooperative. The momentum you have, the positive sense you have, is incredibly impactful.
hmm
If you're in Australia at that point in time and you're complaining and things are horrible and difficult and your kids shouldn't become farmers and you don't see a hope in the future and you just want to get out, that affects your decisions no matter how hard you try not to. And
drastically.
if you're in New Zealand thinking, well, we're going to rule the world, man, we're going to become great. We're going to consolidate now. We're going to go out and take over the world. That changes how you approach things. And I think that that's a great example of where, as much as the business decisions, as opposed to the energy and positivity of those sectors, made a huge difference.
Yeah.
Now, there's a million other things you can look at, and if you want to get your PhD, you can discuss water availability and weather patterns and trade agreements if you want to. But at the heart of it, that's what caused that incredible divergence in Australia versus New Zealand.
Well, Jay, I don't know anyone else better than you to discuss all these things working around co-ops and how it's changed over the years. You've had such a long career in it, have seen so much, have been around the world working in it.
That just means I'm old, Paul.
I wasn't going to say it. I'll let you say it.
I see it. I feel it. I know it.
But before you go, with that, what's been the most rewarding moment or accomplishment in your career?
Oh, interesting question. Um, I'll answer it maybe a little bit fuzzy. I think the thing I'm most personally proud of, I guess is the right way to say it, is I always did the stuff I thought was the most challenging. I never took the easy way out. I never decided to do what was safest. I think my wife gets a kick out of the fact that every job I've ever had paid less than the one I had before. When I went to the Netherlands, there was a 2-year commitment and no commitment to give me a return ticket. It's like sink or swim. When we went to New Zealand, the other side of the world, which, tell our family we're going to New Zealand, they didn't know where it was. And so the idea that you always challenge yourself, try something different. The idea for me that you need to be afraid, right? If you're not afraid of what you're doing, you probably need to change it up a little bit. So personally, that's been pretty cool. I like that. And if I look back at the things that have changed, there's quite a few folks I can point to around the world who are in dairy, and I think I've helped them. I think I've helped them get where they're at. And I like that. I like the fact that I hope I left it in a better place than I found it. Rightly or wrongly, I like to think I left it in a better place than I found it.
Well, you definitely had an impact on me over the 18 years or so that we've known each other, and I've really appreciated the helping hand that you've given me to get into different roles in the industry, and I've seen you do that for other people as well, and just been very passionate about being involved in the dairy industry and cooperatives. So I appreciate that about you.
Thanks. I take zero credit for Paul. I take zero credit for the folks who've done great things. I'm just happy to know that at some point I saw them along the way. So yeah, that's been most rewarding. And it's, we talked about before, I'll close out with this. If you look around the world today, right, and somebody says, I want to move someplace and get a career, not a job. I want a career. I want something where I can feel positive what I'm doing, about create some wealth for my family, about create a good livelihood for my family, about have opportunities to do things. Everything in the world today, everything screams agriculture. It doesn't have to be dairy. Whether it's nutrition, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the environment, whether it's energy, everything comes to ag. And so many people today don't see it that way. They see it as an old, tired sector, an old, tired industry. You want to do something exciting? You want to see opportunities? You want diversity of places you can do and things you can do? For all the negativity around ag and animal agriculture and dairy in general, spectacular. It's as good today as ever. It's not easy, never been easy. It's just a great opportunity. And it's fun to know that it's still there today. All these years later, it's still a great opportunity for people. For your kids as well, Paul.
There we go. That's a great point. I really appreciate that. Jay Waldvogel, I usually ask people, how can people get a hold of you? But I'm guessing you probably don't want them to. I'll just leave it at that. You're retired now. You want to go cut firewood. I get it. But I really appreciate taking the time to talk with us today on this subject.
It's been an honor, Paul. Look forward to seeing you down the road next time.
Once again, thanks for listening to the AgCulture Podcast, tuning in with us this week with our conversation with Jay Waldvogel. I hope you enjoyed that. And as always, if you found value in this episode, please share it with somebody that you know. And if you'd be so kind to leave us a rating or review on one of the podcast platforms of your choice, we'd really appreciate that. Come find us at agculturepodcast.com or check us out at one of the major social media platforms. We're on pretty much all of them, so you can follow along on my travels around the world at those platforms if you want to see what I'm up to. But until next week, I'm Paul Windemaller. Tune in next week for another exciting episode of AgCulture Podcast.